thought he's so old, as soon as he gets on board, they're going to hit the Atlantic. I mean, she had a lifetime of, you know, experience dealing with ships that sail all over the world. And the Atlantic, everybody knows, is a very, very rough ocean. You get 30-foot, 40-foot swells. So she was thinking, if, you know, he's so old and frail, if he goes on the boat to New York, he's not going to make it. And she was nearly right. You know, it was a genuine concern. But Prabhupada, before he sets off, maybe he's trying to predicate Srimati Maharaj's mind, yeah, for things to come. Because he says he's been carried by this India Steamship Company all over the world. So he had, again, that promise, you know, that kind of vision that he was not just going to stop at one place. He was, you know, trying to capture the whole world with his preaching. So that, again, that confidence. And then finally, for all over the world, for scientific knowledge of God. Scientific knowledge of God. So science is God. That's, you know, and that's been that way for the last 100 years. And Prabhupada knew very well what kind of atmosphere he was going to be arriving into. You know, the atheistic, materialistic, evolutionists, you know, propaganda that was sweeping through the West and every other place. In October of '65, I think October, just when Prabhupada, you know, left Butler and gone up to New York, there was a whole article in Time magazine about the God is Dead society. So somebody had formed a new society, God is dead. So, you know, extremely atheistic atmosphere. In April of '66, just before Prabhupada started ISKCON in 26 2nd Avenue, there was an article, again, the lead article in Time magazine, the cover had 3 words on it: is God dead? That was, and then the whole article's about this, you know, God is dead society, and, you know, very slanted, etc., etc. So that was what Prabhupada was coming into. And all of that claim, of course, was based on science. So Prabhupada puts that he's bringing scientific knowledge of God. But science and God are like, you know, 2 poles apart. You can't talk in the same breath, you know, at least for most people, and say that science and God realization go together. But Prabhupada's advertising, he's going to give scientific knowledge of God. So what is he doing? Is he just, you know, kind of borrowing on the current trend? All right, people are interested in science, let's stick that label on it, that will attract them. Yeah, whereas what he's really talking about is God. No. Prabhupada was talking about the Bhagavatam as the real science, you know, of understanding life and the universe. Vedic cosmology, you know, what you are in the universe, the way that you see everything, the way you see yourself. So Prabhupada was going to present an actual science, not speculation. That was his point, that this is science because this is a fixed knowledge. It's always been there, 5,000, 10,000, whatever, how many years you like. But spiritual knowledge is always applicable. Whereas the stuff that's presented as scientific nowadays is just speculative garbage, basically. I mean, just recently we've seen this film, what's his name? Stephen Hawking, and The Theory of Everything. Oh, rubbish. He's such a rascal, that man. And it explains how he did his PhD on the Big Bang Theory. And it was supposed to be such a brilliant exposition. He got his PhD, he got his recognition. He himself now says that it was all wrong. Right? His own thesis is now rejected and says it's wrong. And he's been saying that for years. So, has he given back his PhD? He's admitted that he got it on a bogus premise, but he's never given it back. And now he's coming out with this, what is it, the grand design, M theory, string theory, and all these kinds of things. But none of it's based on facts. All of it's based on just conjecture, philosophical speculation on his part, and basically it's just cheating people. They're presenting that, you know, this idea of not now the Big Bang, but, you know, the eternal universe that doesn't require a God because it's always been there, this kind of idea. He's just plugging away although they know, that all of it is just conjecture. There's not any scientific evidence to back up anything. Now, in 1975, Prabhupada was on a morning walk in Vrindavan. There was, Alanath was there, and he'd been preaching here in Sweden. And he mentioned to Prabhupada, because every day when Prabhupada was talking, he always took some opportunity or another to shoot down material science. Always, every single day. I can't remember a day when he didn't do it. So it was again talking about the charade of modern science and how we had to expose them. So Alanath mentioned that in Sweden we're putting together a magazine specifically, to expose all these scientific, cheating processes, bluffing. So Prabhupada immediately stopped. I guess he was thinking that Prabhupada would say, yes, very good. But Prabhupada stopped. He said, no. He said, don't do it unless you are very expert. He said, otherwise you will look childish and foolish. He said, I can challenge the scientists because we are confident on this one point, that life cannot be produced from matter. And everything that Prabhupada did stood on that one platform, that life is not a product of matter. And you'll see in 150 years of Darwinism, nobody's ever managed to come up with a single shred of evidence that life actually comes from chemical combinations. And if you challenge them, they can't say anything. There's a movie called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. It was about the intelligent design propaganda that was coming out, the fight that they had in the courts, and they weren't allowed to teach it as an alternative view of the world, in the American schools. So they were expelled from school. Anyway, in the series of interviews that are in that film, it's very interesting. They interview Richard Dawkins. He's another crook, British cheater. The God Delusion, he wrote a book. So they interviewed Richard Dawkins and they asked him, well, Richard, where does life actually come from? Well, we just don't know. Maybe it's come from outer space. Aliens. But of course, if there is life on outer space, that would have had to have evolved also. So, they're only looking at this one planet, coming up with this idea that life on this planet evolved. They have no proof of anything else anywhere else in the universe anyway. But he's insisting that, well, even if we can't prove that life evolved on this planet and it actually came from somewhere else, wherever it came from, the life there would have had to have evolved. I mean, how bogus is that? That means that whatever information is coming in, he's already got a prejudice that he's processing it through and, regurgitating, that there's no such thing as God. But then even himself, when he was on TV one time, I'm not sure whether it was when he had a debate with the Archbishop of Canterbury or it was just some interview, but he himself, they were talking about atheism, and he said, well, on a scale of 1 to 7, I'm a 6.9 atheist. So they said, you're not a 7? He said, no, because actually you can never prove that there is no God. So this is the man who's been campaigning for many years. They had a campaign about 4 or 5 years back in England where they spent a lot of money taking adverts out that were, you know how they put the banners on the sides of the double-decker buses. So they took out a whole bunch of adverts on the sides of the double-decker buses that there's probably no God, so relax and enjoy yourself. Right? There's probably no God, so relax and enjoy yourself. He did that with the humanist society. But the notable thing is that he could not say there is no God. Yeah? They can't say that because nobody can prove it. So there's probably no God. I'm a 6.9, not a 7. They're all cheaters, bogus rascals. It's not science at all. It's just speculation. If you get the chance, read Vyasaki's book, Cosmology on Trial. He goes into a lot of these arguments, very, very expertly presented. But the point that we're talking about here is that Prabhupada came into that atmosphere of atheism. And he's advertising that he's going to present scientific knowledge of God. This is not just him using a PR tool. All right, everybody likes science. So let's say this is scientific. even if it's not. No, Prabhupada was actually going to back up, you know, his claim with facts, with information from the Bhagavatam that would establish that life does not come from matter, that there is a, you know, consciousness is beyond matter and there is a supreme consciousness. And he was going to prove it from the Bhagavatam. So he was very, very deliberate. He was coming to challenge people. He was not coming there, you know, to blend in or to be a tourist and after a few months go back to India as a repatriated preacher. Which is one of his, you know, comments about Bon Maharaj. It's like an oblique insult. Yeah, a repatriate. You advertise yourself as a repatriated preacher. Yeah, oh, I've been to the West. Yeah, what did you do? Well, nothing. But so Prabhupada was going there to challenge, you know, to establish the Bhagavatam as the only platform on which real knowledge rests. That was his determination. So you've got all of that, you know, in the first heading of that little pamphlet. So as Prabhupada relaxed behind his desk, I read out the body of the text. It says, the sufferings of the entire human society can at once be brought under control simply by individual practice of bhakti yoga, a simple and easy process of chanting the holy names of God. Every country, every nation, and every community throughout the world has some conception of the holy name of God, and as such, either the Hindus or the Mohammedans or the Christians, everyone can easily chant the holy name of God in a meditative mood, and that will bring about the required peace and goodwill in the present problematic human society. Any inquiry in this connection will be gladly answered by Sri Swamiji. The Hindus generally chant the holy name of God in a 16 chain of transcendental sound, composed of 32 alphabets, as Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare. The Vedic literatures like the Upanishads and Puranas recommend chanting of the above-mentioned 16 holy names at a stretch, and Lord Sri Chaitanya, whose cult of chanting the holy name of God gave special importance on these transcendental sounds. In this age of Kali, or the age of hate, hypocrisy, corruption, and quarrel, the only remedial measure is that every man should chant the holy name of the Lord both individually and collectively. Then he went on to give the English translations of the Shikshashtakam, and it ended with some highly complimentary reviews of Prabhupada's translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's Prabhupada's opening introduction. Anybody that he met when he arrived in America 50 years ago now, he was giving out his little pamphlet. And it's an interesting read because, again, the claim seems to be fantastic. Just as Prabhupada was already advertising 60 volumes, he only had 3 at the time. So it also sounds a little equally, you know, exaggerated. The sufferings of the entire human society can at once be brought under control. I mean, that's a big statement.
Quite.
How many sufferings are there? You know, political, social, economic, you know, whatever it is. You know, there's so much stuff going on in the world, there are so many problems. And here's Prabhupada claiming that you just chant Hare Krishna and all your problems are solved. Magic. Yeah. This is the silver bullet. You know, just sit and chant. I mean, it sounds very fundamentalist, very simplistic, and not something that you would probably take very seriously. But if you know the science, you do. See, Prabhupada understood that what the problems are that are manifest in the world are all coming from the condition of the heart. What you think, so you feel, and so you will do. Thinking, feeling, and willing. Because people's hearts are disturbed because, you know, they're full of corruption, hate, hypocrisy, you know, these kinds of things, all these negative feelings. That comes out and translates into the actions that they perform. So the whole world, everybody, they have no process of purifying themselves of those negative feelings. Even though sentimentally, like those people with the peace, initiative, they may think that they're making some progress, but what's the practical purification? That's the point. Yeah. You can't change the situation in the world through the UN or, through thisism or thatism, communism or capitalism, or, through social manipulation or by economic manipulation. It doesn't work. None of it has any effect because it's all external. And you're not dealing with the real problem. The real problem is internal. The real problem is with the way that people see themselves as living beings and the way that they see other living beings and the way that they see the world. And the way that people nowadays see all of that is it's a process of exploitation. Everybody's in competition. Nobody has goodwill. Nobody's peaceful. Everybody's continually agitated. And they're always scrambling after this resource and that resource, even to the point where they don't mind dropping bombs on the heads of millions of innocent people so they can get the oil or, whatever it is. This is, the only platform that people know how to act because they have no proper sense of who they are. So Prabhupada knew that there's no point in, making all these conferences and all these other things because they don't get to the actual problem. They don't get down to the core root of the problem, the disease. That's the condition of the heart. It's the state of consciousness that people are in. And therefore, anything that falls less than changing the consciousness of a person is going to fail. The Prabhupada wasn't sentimental. He wasn't interested, in, just offering some, easy words. He wanted real action. He wasn't interested in anything else. And he knew the power and effect of the holy name in bringing about that transformation of consciousness. So he wasn't just recognizing the problem, but he was offering the solution as well. That just by this easy method of chanting the holy names of God, and it doesn't have to be the Hare Krishna mantra, although that's the best one, but you can chant any name of God, or whatever, milieu that you're coming from, and you'll get some effect. You'll become peaceful. You develop this vision of every other living being as you, as being part and parcel of the Supreme Living Being. Then there's no question of any envy anymore. Yeah? There's no question of competition and fighting. Everybody should live peacefully. When we were in Melbourne in 1976, a government minister, state government minister, came to see Prabhupada, and he told him that if you want peace and happiness in society, then he said, why don't the United Nations make a declaration that all land belongs to God? Right? That for us, that's an easy one. All land belongs to God. And as such, then, that land should be made available for God's parts and parcels. So everybody's a part and parcel of God. So share. So he said, you just pass that one resolution, you solve so many problems. But they won't do that. They don't want to say that God exists. They don't want to say that everything belongs to Him. They want to pretend that they are, God themselves, or they can be God if they just accumulate enough material wares, so to speak. So they're always fighting. So this is Prabhupada's answer to the world's problems. Chant Hare Krishna. This is a serious proposition. This is not some simplistic, fanatic, fundamentalist presentation, but it's based on this science of God that's found in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And once you understand that, automatically your consciousness is transformed, your misunderstanding of who you are is cleared away, and you come to a practical realization that as a living being, what your situation actually is, and what the solution to your sufferings are. So none of that can happen without the science that's found in the Bhagavatam, and the expression of that science through the holy name. If you chant Hare Krishna, then the name himself will reveal all of this knowledge that's in the Bhagavatam. It comes within the heart of the chanter as you get more and more purified. So that was Prabhupada then. Very clear about what he was about, why he was going to the West, and what he was going to present. And whether people accepted it or not, that he didn't care. And an example of that, we'll end on this note, What time do I go to?
1:45.
Okay, so we're getting near. So, an indication of Prabhupada's determination. We were with Prabhupada in New Mayapur in August of '76, myself and Harikesh. So Harikesh was Prabhupada's new secretary. And we were having a chit-chat. And the background of that was just us making some observations about how difficult the task that Prabhupada had undertaken in trying to, transport a pure spiritual culture into the middle of this atheistic, Malacha, meat-eating, murderous culture that we live in. Like an almost impossible task. So Harikesh observed that the 4 sinful acts that we avoid are all unnatural. And Prabhupada agreed. He said, unnatural, yes. He said, what for smoking? What for drinking? And then about our devotees, he said, how nicely they just sit down on the ground and take prasadam. So he said, why is there a need of a table and chair and dishes and fork and knife and so on and so on? Why? So Harikesh laughed. He said, well, it's hard to cut the meat. You need a good surface. So Prabhupada was also laughing. He said, so our Bon Maharaj, so this is another Bon Maharaj anecdote. It's like Gopal Ban in Bengal. So he said, our Bon Maharaj. So once I was eating at his festival. So he's a Bodha Sahib. You know what a Bodha Sahib is? A Sahib means a big Westerner. Bodha Sahib means a big Westerner. It's a term that traditionalists in India referred to, the Indians that were affected by the British propaganda and, took up the British ways. So, it was kind of a sarcastic slight on them. The traditionalists would say, oh, now he's become a Bodha Sahib, a big Westerner. So Prabhupada's saying that about Bon Maharaj. So he is given a fork and a knife. So I did not know. I don't remember even which way I took the fork. So Bon Maharaj began to criticize. You're going to a foreign country and you do not know which hand to take this knife and fork? So I told him, I'm not going to learn all these things. I'm going to teach them something else, to forget it. You went there to learn all these things, but I'm not going to learn anything. So that was Prabhupada. Yeah. That conversation must have taken place in 1965, because he's saying that, oh, you're going to a foreign country, so it must have been around that time at least. Prabhupada's ambition to go there, either he got it settled up or he was just about to. So, anyway, that was Prabhupada's determination. He was very clear what he was going for. If he was successful or not, he didn't care. That was not why he was going there. He was going there to please his spiritual master. And that then led to his success, because by being fully surrendered to his spiritual master, attempting impossible things, at his age, nobody would, as he said, nobody would dream of going out from India at 70 years old. And he also mentions there about, in that news article, about this supernormal achievement of translating the whole Bhagavatam. And of course, when he got to the West, Krishna immediately supplied him the facilities to make that a realistic proposition. If he'd have stayed in Vrindavan banging away on a manual typewriter, writing it out, composing everything, writing it out, correcting it, retyping it, and all the rest of it, it would have taken him until he was 115. But as soon as he got to New York, Gargamuni bought him a dictaphone. They put it on Prabhupada's desk. Brahmananda Prabhu, of course, who had just left us, he was telling this story. They put it on Prabhupada's desk, and they were going to show him, how it works. I mean, Prabhupada just, not long from Vrindavan, he wasn't like a technological person. And he just said, no, that's all right, just leave it. They came in the next morning, Prabhupada was already using it, translating the Bhagavatam, so it caught on really fast. So he immediately got the means. He got the dictaphone, then he set up a system, he got some typists, then they set up ISKCON Press, then they set up the BBT. In 1960, when Prabhupada stopped working on the BTG. He'd been trying to use that as his main tool for preaching for about 16 years. It was first published in 1944. It was meant to come out every fortnight, but it was very, very sporadic. A couple in 44, the next 2 issues that we know of, I think in 1952. In 1956 he got 11 issues out, then in 58 2 issues, in 1960 11 issues. But after that nothing, because he stopped working on the BTG and he started working on the Bhagavatam. So he had to put aside, you know, what was his original vehicle for preaching in English, back to Godhead, so that he could do an even more impossible task. So in 1976, when Prabhupada was in Washington for the 200th anniversary of American independence, the BBT printed 1 million Back to Godheads just for that month. 1 million. And that had always was stated by Prabhupada, that was his ambition. He worked for a magazine for some of his godbrothers for some time. And he immediately wanted to, you know, get them to invest the money to make the magazine on a par with Time or Life magazine. And they wrote back, you know, the godbrother wrote back and said, no, 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 we don't want all this. You just keep it small. Don't attempt to make it, increase it. You know, just keep it coming out. Prabhupada immediately left. He had an ambition. He wanted his Back to Godhead to become as prolific as Time and Life magazine. And in 1966, when he got his first disciples, this was the first vehicle that he gave them for their preaching. He handed over the Back to Godhead, which was his offering to his spiritual master, and told them, now you make this your magazine. And he said, I want it on the level of Time and, you know, and Life. So what do they start off with? This hand-cranked, cyclo-style mimeograph machines that they bought. You had to hand-crank to print every page out. You know, each, what do you call it, the original template, each template would only last for 100 reproductions, and you had to redo the whole thing. So they were churning it out by hand, they were collating the pages by hand, they were stapling them together, and then Gagamuni was going out with a little hand cart and trying to sell them in the East Village. That's how Back to Godhead began. And Prabhupada's already telling them to make it bigger than Life, bigger than Time magazine. By 1976, 10 years later, he's got 1 million copies every month coming out. What Prabhupada did is phenomenal. There's no explanation for it, except that it really was supernormal. And again, last little story, in July of '76, Prabhupada was at Banana in England, and George Harrison came to see him. We'd just received the 7th canto, a couple of volumes, and so Prabhupada immediately gave one of his own copies to George. And they had a very nice meeting. At one point, George commented, he said, you know, you can't even read all of this stuff, what to speak about, you know, writing it. He just couldn't believe that Prabhupada was so prolific in his writing. He said, you can't even, I couldn't even read all of this. And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, it is not for a normal human being. Yeah. He acknowledged himself. He says, not a normal human being could do, no ordinary human being could do this. So Prabhupada, of course, had lots of inspirations. His main thing was his spiritual master, but from within also he was getting a lot of, you know, impetus in different ways. This, sometime in the 1960s, when he was at the Radha Damodar temple, he had this, whatever you want to call it, a visitation from Rupa, Sanatana and Jiva Goswamis. The 3 of them appeared to him and gave him specific instructions about preaching in the West. Now that's Prabhupada, you know, not an ordinary human being. You know, something very special, but externally you wouldn't think any